According to the Wall Street Journal, some Trump administration officials have privately assessed that the United States could no longer fully execute its contingency plans to defend Taiwan. And no, that's not because of anything China did. Rather, it's because of what just got fired off in the Persian Gulf. In a few weeks of war with Iran, the United States and its allies burned through more interceptors than the entire global production base can replace in years. The systems that are supposed to protect cities from incoming missiles in Seoul, in Riyadh, in Tel Aviv, across nearly 24 countries, all run on the same American supply chain. And that supply chain was already struggling before the Middle East went to hell. For most of the last 3 decades, missile defense has been one of those things that just quietly worked. The reason skyscrapers kept going up in places that sit within range of people who'd rather they didn't. What happens when the ammunition runs out is a question that, until very recently, nobody seriously had to ask. Fast forward to today, and things are more than just serious. For the first time in a long time, American allies are faced with the very real possibility that should a vast war break out, they might be unable to properly defend themselves. By the time the ceasefire between the United States, Israel, and Iran came into effect on April the 8th, Washington had fired somewhere between 1,000 and 1,430 of its Patriot defensive interceptors at Iranian missiles and drones inbound toward countries across the Gulf and beyond, estimated to be roughly half of its pre-war stockpile. Patriot is the most well-known of these systems, but it's just one layer of a broader ecosystem, one that the US and its allies rely on to shoot down incoming threats at various altitudes and speeds. Across other interceptor categories, the picture was broadly similar or even worse. A recent breakdown by the Center for Strategic and International Studies puts US expenditure of THOAD at somewhere between 190 and 290 launched out of a pre-war inventory of just 360. At the upper bounds of their analysis, that means roughly 80% are gone. SM-3 interceptors fared similarly, with more than 30% of the pre-war stockpile expended, and SM-6 stocks were drawn down by another 10 to 20% on top of that. This gets even worse when you look at the Gulf states themselves, which have been absorbing most of the incoming fire. The UAE, which was on the receiving end of nearly half of all Iranian strikes, had burned through roughly 3/4 of its entire interceptor stockpile. Saudi Arabia and Bahrain, meanwhile, were north of 85%, and an estimate by Bloomberg stated that Qatar was, at one point, just 4 days from running dry. The Pentagon and the White House have both closed ranks to insist that they have more than enough to last out whatever Iran may throw at the region, and there is reason to believe that they are telling the truth here. Concerns in the early days of the war about the Gulf monarchies completely running dry were rendered more or less moot as airstrikes were able to bring down the rate of Iranian launches by an estimated 90% by the end of the first month. But finishing this war, whatever that may mean at this point, is completely different from being ready for the next one. These stockpiles were not full to begin with the US already having transferred more than 600 Patriot interceptors to Ukraine and other allied nations since 2022, a drawdown that was quietly getting attention in Washington. It was last summer's 12-day war, codenamed Operation Rising Lion, that turned that attention into genuine alarm. In order to block Iranian missiles during that conflict, the US launched roughly 150 THOAD interceptors, roughly a quarter of Washington's entire supply, along with another 80 standard missile interceptors. By the time Epic Fury started 8 months later, not a single one of them had been replaced. So at this point, it is pretty clear that the US, and by extension, most of its allies, are in tough shape in terms of current supplies. The question, then, is how fast can they build more? And it's here that things go from concerning to downright terrifying. These things are not just thrown together on an assembly line in an afternoon. Each one is a high-tech guided missile in its own right, with components that take over a year to manufacture from start to finish. Currently, the US only domestically produces 50 or so Patriot interceptors a month. For some context, US forces fired around 400 in the first 16 days of Epic Fury alone, consuming in less than a month what the production line puts out in roughly 8. THOAD is worse. According to CSIS's Wes Rumbach, no new THOAD interceptors have been delivered to US inventory since July 2023, a 30-month production gap that predates the war entirely, and even now production sits under 100 a year. At that rate, replacing just the interceptors expended in Epic Fury takes 3 years, assuming more don't get fired off in the meantime. Part of this comes down to budget priorities and political will. For most of the Cold War period, missile defenses were built around a different threat model entirely. A small number of high-end ballistic missiles in a brief, decisive exchange with interceptors as a last resort. Some of these systems, like Patriot, actually date back to the 1970s, when the concern was about stopping an all-out Soviet strike. The kind of drone and missile barrage that has come to define every Middle East conflict, not to mention the skies over Ukraine, simply wasn't on anyone's radar. But even once the political will is found, that only clears one hurdle. You still have to find companies with both the facilities and the sophistication to build these systems, and the industrial base that's supposed to do it has been hollowed out for decades. The propellant systems that make these missiles fly are now produced by just 2 American companies, down from 6, and both of them share suppliers and depend on a single source for one of the key chemicals the propellant needs to ignite. In spite of all of this, Washington has been trying to ramp up production since well before Epic Fury kicked off. The Pentagon signed multiple framework agreements earlier this year, targeting 3 to 4 times current output across every major interceptor category, oversaw the groundbreaking on a new munitions factory in Arkansas in January, and brokered a $500 million deal with Honeywell to surge component production. Even still, this is going to be a massive uphill battle, one that's realistically looking at end-of-decade timelines, not the next few months. Given just how tight supplies have gotten, officials have reportedly been calling in companies from GM to Ford to GE to discuss converting civilian manufacturing plants into at least partial missile component production facilities. By all accounts, it was the first time Washington had asked automakers to consider retooling for munitions since the Second World War, and that fact, more than anything else, probably tells you everything you need to know about how the people running this privately understand the hole they're in. Now, before we get into that hole, I guess, just a quick word about our new subscriber site, fronts.co, which is the home for bonus in-depth content from Fronts, WarFronts, and Homefronts. And every week, we publish 2 exclusive videos and at least 2 expert-written articles getting into the nitty-gritty of the conflicts shaping our world. Basically, if WarFronts is for the informed layman, Fronts is for the conflict nerd in us all, a way to get a little geekier than we can afford to here on the main channel. So for example, we have our weekly 90-minute podcast on all things Middle East, articles written by experts on things like the limitations of turtle tanks, plus our weekly briefing room videos to fill you in on all the obscure wars flying under the media's radar. But not ours. Look, if you like what we do here and would love to see us get into more depth, fronts.co is the place for you. It costs just $5 a month or $50 a year. And now, let's get back to that hole we were going to get into. Shopping elsewhere. Now, if you're watching this from outside the United States or the Middle East, you might be thinking that none of this is really your problem. Unfortunately, it very much is. Somewhere around 24 countries are running their primary missile defense on US-made interceptors right now, and outside of Japan, where Mitsubishi license builds Patriots under a decades-old arrangement, every major US-aligned air defense architecture in the world depends on a supply chain that largely runs through Arkansas, Arizona, and Alabama. For those countries, there's no second source. Washington comes up short, and, well, in short, they are. During Epic Fury, that arrangement has been stress-tested, and the results are, to put it mildly, not really reassuring. As many as 48 Thought interceptors were reportedly pulled from South Korea and moved to the Middle East back in March. And while Seoul almost certainly did everything in its power to fight that move, as President Lee Jae-myung said in a cabinet meeting on March the 10th, quoting, "While we have expressed opposition, the reality is that we cannot fully impose our position." End quote. And that leaves countries like South Korea with an obvious question. If you can't count on Washington to leave your interceptors where they are, who else can you buy from? And to be fair, there are some alternative options out there. They just don't have a track record that you'd really want to bet your country's defense on. Iran built just about its entire air defense architecture around Russia's S-300 system, which Moscow has exported to some 20 countries over the last few decades, including Venezuela. We'll let you fill in the gaps on how well they've held up. More recently, Tehran also attempted to develop its own domestic system, the Bavar 373, and it hasn't fared much better, although Tehran has claimed that it was responsible for the downing of a US F-15 fighter jet in early April. Russia does have an updated, modernized version, the S-400, which they swear is the real deal this time, they promise. While it has outperformed the S-300, this is largely by clearing what is quite possibly the lowest threshold imaginable, and not exactly doing it by much either. It's been deployed to the front against Ukraine, where Kiev has been able to destroy multiple batteries and fly both drones and Storm Shadow cruise missiles through S-400 coverage zones, often without issue. India is perhaps the one outlier here. They've also relied heavily on Russian Russian hardware and claimed the system held up well against the Pakistani military last year. China's main export offering, the HQ-9, has a similar reputation. In that same confrontation between Pakistan and India last year, Beijing was actually backing the other side. It didn't matter much, though, as Indian strikes reportedly penetrated Pakistani air defenses with relative ease. Long story short, neither of their track records come with exactly ringing endorsements. And that's assuming countries would want to buy these in the first place, which is increasingly in doubt given the political costs that come with siding with either Moscow or Beijing. Turkey is something of a case study here. Despite being a member of NATO, they decided to purchase Russian S-400 systems, which led to a swift sanctioning of Ankara and got them expelled from the F-35 program back in 2019. So, if Russian and Chinese systems can't do the job, what's actually available? Well, Denmark answered that question in April by becoming the first export customer for a joint Franco-Italian system, a deal that Danish defense officials explicitly framed around US delivery timelines being too long. The system enters service this year, and its manufacturer is targeting production above 300 interceptors a year by 2028, up from somewhere around 80 to 100 in 2024. Germany's Iris-T family, which Ukraine has been using to good effect, is scaling too. A new facility opened in January, but roughly 3/4 of current production is going to Ukraine, which is itself delaying Germany's own buildup. So in a small number of cases, it seems there are alternatives, but they're either untested or have even lower production levels of interceptors than American systems. Perhaps the biggest question, though, is this: just how did the United States, of all countries, end up in such an unprepared situation? How the rules changed. Now, it's worth remembering that none of this used to be a crisis, even with low levels of interceptor production. It just wasn't assumed that you'd ever need a vast number of them. During the 1991 Gulf War, for example, Saddam Hussein fired in the vicinity of 88 Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia over the course of 6 weeks, and that was considered to be an extraordinary provocation. That was also the good old days. All of this stemmed from just how expensive it was to research, design, and then produce large-scale ballistic missiles that could actually reach their target. As late as the 1990s, it was something that only a handful of countries could manage. Fast forward to today, and it's another world entirely. A single Iranian Shahed drone now costs somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 per unit. And while there are many cheap alternatives to expensive interceptors for downing drones, just ask the Ukrainians, not every country has yet invested in them. Which is how we got to the fundamentally wild sight of Bahrain and others using multi-million-dollar interceptors to down drones assembled for a fraction of the cost. Perhaps more relevantly, more nations are now also making at least halfway decent ballistic missiles in large numbers. The key factor here is cost. Fundamentally, it is dramatically easier to shoot something in the general direction of your enemy and hope for the best than it is to track the incoming threat, analyze the precise path it's on, calculate the needed trajectory to intercept it, and then actually launch on it, all while course-correcting for variations mid-flight. Not for nothing, though, this hasn't quite been the dramatic shift that our fast-forwarding may have made it seem. Ukraine has been at the forefront of this new type of war for 4 years now. Russia, a longtime ally of the Islamic Republic, has launched thousands of Shahed-type drones and its own cruise missiles at Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, and the interceptor maths got really ugly really fast. Fundamentally, it is just not sustainable for a military to be shooting million-dollar interceptors at $20,000 drones, and neither the US nor Europe has been able to keep pace with the resupply numbers needed. This was, of course, felt most prominently in Kyiv, who are the ones actually depending on these, and as a result, they've gotten really good at their own version of counter-drone warfare. The system they've developed relies on using 3D printers to mass-produce interceptor drones that can chase down and ram a Shahed for somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 apiece. By early 2026, Ukraine's armed forces were receiving more than 1,500 of them a day, and unlike the expensive, clunky, old-school Russian or Chinese interceptors, these boasted a success rate north of 70%. So when Operation Epic Fury began and the Gulf was coming to terms with potentially completely running out of American ammo, Kyiv was the capital they were calling. By the end of March, Zelensky was in Saudi Arabia signing 10-year defense cooperation agreements with both the Kingdom and Qatar, with the UAE being expected to follow suit. While this is a genuine breakthrough, and one that both Washington and the wider world should be paying more attention to, especially given the ongoing shortages, this new approach is pretty much limited to drone attacks. For all their ingenuity, the Ukrainians haven't yet found a cheap, scalable way to stop ballistic missiles. So on that front, we're right back to square one. On the interceptor side of things, there is some hope coming out of Japan. We mentioned earlier that Mitsubishi has been building Patriots under license for years now, but post-war export restrictions meant that they couldn't actually send them anywhere. That changed when Tokyo revised the rules in late 2023, and last year saw the very first shipment arrive in the United States. It was only about 10 missiles, a drop in the bucket, but if other allied nations with the industrial capacity were able to start producing their own interceptors under a similar agreement, well, eventually it might lead somewhere. The one country that has shown true independence on this front is Israel, which spent decades and billions of dollars building the only non-American full-spectrum missile defense architecture that has held up reliably in multiple combat crises. The Iron Dome at the short range, David's Sling at the medium range, and Arrow at the ultra-sophisticated end. Yet even that was buckling by mid-March under the Iranian onslaught. Some estimates had Arrow down around 80%, with the IDF pressing lower-tier systems into roles they were never designed for. It worked, kinda. Iranian penetration rates did climb as the war carried on, and did do significant damage in a few strikes like Dimona. Luckily, enough launchers were destroyed to end the acute phase of strikes before things got too serious. The gambling on always being able to take out your opponent's launch infrastructure before they overwhelm your air defenses is not a smart way to plan for conflict. For most of the last 3 decades, the countries under America's umbrella have enjoyed the luxury of treating missile defense as a given. Sometimes that just works, where if someone starts shooting at your cities, a missile getting through is the exception rather than the rule. The technology has been a blessing for much of the world and has saved countless lives. But if these interceptors run out before production lines catch up, the reality of what war really looks like is going to come crashing back down. And right now, the stats remain pretty damn daunting. Thank you for watching.